What's up, Falcons Nation? It's your boy Jew coming at you with another Atlanta Falcons video. As always, Falcons Nation, rise up. In today's video, I'd like to give my thoughts on the Atlanta Falcons 53-man roster. But if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Hit that notification bell so you know when I've done Atlanta Falcons content or NFL content. If you'd like to follow your boy on Twitter and Instagram, you can follow me at Jew Talk Sports. If you'd like to donate to my channel, you can donate to my Cash App, which is the $ Jew Talk Sports. And if you'd like to be a part of my Jew Talk Sports membership, you can hit that join tab here on the channel as well. But with that being said, let's jump right into the video. So as I mentioned in today's video, I do want to give my thoughts on the Atlanta Falcons 53-man roster. As you guys know, I did go over the 53-man roster that I had earlier in my live show. But I do want to talk about some of the surprise cuts and also some of the surprise players that made the roster. So first off, the guys that actually made the 53-man roster that I kind of talked about that were on the bubble, Taylor Heinicke did make the team as that third quarterback, which I think is very smart by the Atlanta Falcons, keeping him on this roster because we know the quarterback position is the most important position on the field, especially on the offense as the field general. And we've seen in the NFC Championship game where the 49ers, all of their quarterbacks got injured and they basically lost the game to the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFC Championship because Brock Purdy was injured in that game. So I definitely think it's smart to keep Taylor Heinicke on this roster, knock on wood, because he has been here all training camp and all preseason. So he knows this system. So it's better off keeping him on the roster in case someone gets injured. You have three capable quarterbacks. Another surprise that made the squad, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, was D'Angelo Malone. D'Angelo Malone is the outside linebacker. He played really well during training camp and during the preseason as far as on special teams. And I really feel like they kept him on this team because he led the NFL with the most tackles on special teams. And he's one of those guys that's a versatile player, but he is one of those guys that I think made this roster mainly because of his prowess on special teams. So shouts out to D'Angelo Malone on making this roster. We'll see if he can carve out some type of role on the defensive side of the ball. And then another surprise player that made the team that I didn't have on my 53-man roster was Javon Gwynn. He's basically an offensive guard. He can play both left guard and right guard. We drafted him out of South Carolina, I believe last season, if I'm not mistaken. But he's one of those guys that's an offensive lineman. And you guys know that I'm huge on the trenches. And I really feel like they kept him on the roster, for depth purposes as well, because you never know when you're going to need that extra offensive lineman. If someone does go down with a serious injury, he's another guy that's, knows the system, has been here and been developing behind these veteran guys. So he's familiar with Coach Ledford in that offensive line room. So I really feel like that was smart keeping him on the roster as well. Now, the surprise cuts from this 53-man roster was cornerback Kevin King, who came back out of retirement, the former Green Bay Packer. He's very familiar with Jerry Gray, who's our assistant head coach and who's the DB's coach. So I'm surprised that Kevin King didn't make this roster because he played really well during preseason. He had an interception in that first game against the Dolphins. And I was surprised to see that he got released. I don't know if he'll be a player we try to pick up as far as on waivers for our practice squad. But I thought he did enough to make this team. They talked about him also not only being a player that can play corner, but he was also playing a little bit of the safety position during training camp and during preseason. So I was shocked to see that he didn't make the roster because he's one of those veteran players that's familiar with this coaching staff. But Antonio Hamilton, the other corner, Antonio Hamilton Sr., he ended up making the roster over Kevin King. So I wasn't surprised to see Antonio Hamilton make this roster, but I had both him and Kevin King making the roster. Another surprise cut from this 53-man roster was Chris Blair, the wide receiver. I had him as a guy on the bubble as well. He played really well all training camp and during the preseason. To me, he was the best wide receiver during preseason. But as I mentioned before, during my live show, I didn't believe that they would keep him over Casey Washington, who made the squad, because Casey Washington was drafted by our Falcons this season, and he's a rookie, they decided to go with their draft pick over a player that was like a player we picked up last year as an unrestricted or undrafted free agent. So I definitely wish Chris Blair the best. I do believe another team will sign him because he played really well during preseason. He put some really good tape out there. So if he's not picked up by another team on waivers, he's another guy that I could see the Falcons keeping on the practice squad. And then the last guy that didn't make the roster that I thought was on the bubble and had a chance to make the roster was running back Carlos Washington. To me, he's one of the better young running backs that we had on our roster. But then again, as I mentioned, we had a guy in Jace McClellan that we drafted out of Alabama this season. And I really feel like this was a similar situation with Casey Washington as well. Because Jace McClellan was drafted by our team this year, I couldn't see the team keeping Carlos Washington over a player that they just drafted this year that's a rookie that's still developing and things of that nature. So I definitely think that Carlos Washington could possibly sign with another team as well. But he could also be a guy that the Falcons bring back on the practice squad. So those were pretty much the surprise cuts and the surprise players that made the roster. But you guys give me your thoughts on this 53-man roster. I'm not going to go through all of the players that made the roster. The obvious ones like the Kirk Cousins and the Drake Londons. We knew that those guys were going to make the roster. To me, it was the back end players that I was most concerned about to see who would make this roster. But with that being said, I have a lot more content coming for you guys. But as always, Falcons Nation, rise up, be blessed, peace.